I moved into the downstairs apartment of my parents' house when I was 22, craving privacy but still tethered to their looming presence above me. And one weekend when they were out of town, I had my friends Anthony and Jay over to drink, laugh, and blast music without restraint, the kind of night where inhibitions melted and nothing felt real. And after they crashed on the giant couch and I stumbled to my room, I awoke in the middle of the night to footsteps creaking above me, which I dismissed as one of them going upstairs for water, until my locked bedroom doorknob twisted violently, and then stilled, and in my haze I managed to fall back asleep, brushing it off as drunken confusion. But the next night it happened again, this time with a faint knock that sent my heart into my throat and forced me behind a dresser clutching a blunt object, my breath frozen in my lungs while I texted everyone I knew, praying someone would say it was them. But no one answered, and I finally called 911 in a whisper, meeting the police at my window where they entered the house and searched everything, only to find a tall, filthy man hiding under my parents' bed upstairs, staring at me with such hatred I can still feel it burning behind my eyes. And while the police removed him and called it a break-in, I'll never know how long he'd been living there unnoticed, maybe days, maybe longer. And the horror didn't end there because years later, alone in a remote cabin surrounded by endless woods, I began to hear the same scratching at night, the same subtle taps on the window, always just as I was drifting off to sleep, until one night I finally saw him. A dark silhouette outside my window, not a raccoon or a tree branch, but a man, the same man, standing still, watching, waiting, and when I ran to call for help, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps inside the house, not behind me in the forest but inside the hallway, and I fled into the woods barefoot, running through branches and brush. As police lights shimmered in the distance, never returning, never looking back, because something evil had latched onto me, something patient and persistent and human, and now every time I close my eyes I hear it, the slow turning of a doorknob in the dark, a whisper from inside the walls, and a presence that no lock, no distance, and no prayer can keep away. That I haven't gone back to that house since. But 2 weeks after everything happened, I got a call from my mom in the middle of the night, her voice shaking, barely able to form words, as she told me they were hearing things again, scratching on the walls, whispering from the vents, and that earlier that day they found the basement door wide open even though it had been locked since the incident. So I told them to leave immediately, but as I stayed on the phone, trying to calm her, I heard my father yell something in the background, followed by a crashing sound, and then silence, dead, suffocating silence, before the call disconnected, without warning. And I sat there paralyzed, staring at the screen, the weight in my chest unbearable as I tried to call back again and again, each time going straight to voicemail. So I jumped in my car and drove through the dead black night, praying it was nothing, that maybe it was just a technical glitch or a misunderstanding. But deep down I knew better. I knew something was horribly wrong. And when I finally pulled into the driveway, the house stood cold and still, every light off. The front door cracked open just enough to see darkness spilling out from within. So I grabbed the crowbar I kept under the seat and stepped inside, calling out their names, only to be greeted by that same suffocating silence. The air in the house stale and thick like it hadn't been breathed in days. And as I moved room to room, heart hammering, I found signs that something had happened. My dad's favorite coffee mug shattered on the floor. The kitchen chairs tipped over, a smear of something dark, trailing along the hallway wall leading toward the basement door, now hanging open and revealing nothing but pitch black, colder than I remembered, as if it were breathing. And against every screaming instinct in my body, I took a step down, then another, until I was swallowed by the dark, the air damp and foul like rotting earth. And that's when I saw it. Just at the edge of the basement, crouched low and facing away from me, a figure, still and hunched, muttering something in a voice too low and wet to be human. And as I stepped back, the floor groaned beneath me and the thing turned, its face pale and stretched too wide, mouth hanging open in a grin that didn't end, eyes like empty sockets filled with something moving behind them. And I ran harder than I ever have, out of the basement, out of the house, not even bothering to shut the door behind me. And as I dove into the car and locked the doors, I could still see it standing at the top of the stairs through the front window, watching, unmoving, like it had been waiting all along. And somehow I knew with a certainty that made my bones ache, That thing didn't just find its way into the house. It had always been there, hiding, watching, learning, and it wasn't done with us. Not even close. That I didn't sleep that night. Just sat in a motel room 2 towns over with the lights on and the chair wedged under the doorknob, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. That trauma and fear had blurred the line between memory and nightmare. But around 3:17 a.m., I remember the time exactly. There was a knock at the door, soft and measured, 3 slow taps, followed by silence. And when I didn't answer, it came again, exactly the same, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there knew I was awake. And I held my breath as the handle twitched, not turning, just twitching like a muscle under skin, before going still. And eventually the sun rose, and I dared to open the door, only to find a strip of old funeral shroud pinned to the wood with a nail. Same fabric my mother had saved from the original mortuary room curtains we tore down when we first moved in. The ones she swore had been stiff with a smell like old breath. And something inside me shifted, broke maybe, because I finally understood this wasn't over, wouldn't be over, not until I faced what was buried in that house's bones. And so I went back, just before dusk, armed with every piece of protection I could find. Salt, a Bible, old blueprints of the house I printed from county records. And that's when I saw it, tucked between the lines of the original 1908 foundation drawings. A sub-basement, not listed in any modern renovation documents. A space that had been sealed during the 1940s, a time when the funeral home changed ownership abruptly after a string of missing body reports that were quietly hushed up. And it was there, beneath the rotting floorboards of the current basement, that I found a hatch, a rusted iron ring set into the cement, previously hidden by old shelving. And when I pried it open, the stench that spilled out was like something ancient and starved, and the ladder below vanished into pitch. But I climbed down anyway, because I had to know, had to understand what had taken my parents. And after what felt like hours, I reached the bottom, my flashlight flickering weakly against slick walls of black stone carved with names. Hundreds of names, none of them ours. Until I reached the end of the corridor, where a single wooden chair sat under a bare light bulb that shouldn't have worked but did. And in the chair was a figure, tall and thin, wrapped in burial linen, head tilted to the side like it had been waiting for me. And when I whispered, "What are you?" it didn't move. But the light above it pulsed once, and then every wall around me whispered at once. A low mournful chant and voices layered over each other like a crowd buried under earth. And I suddenly saw it. Not just the thing in the chair, but what it fed on. What it had always fed on. Grief, loss, pain, the echoes left behind by every broken family that had passed through that house. Each death a seed planted deep. And our arrival, our laughter, our life, had woken it up, made it hungry again. And when I tried to run, I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move, the air too heavy, because the thing had stood, and it wasn't wearing the burial cloths. It was the burial cloths, hollow and filled with shifting shadows, and it raised a single, dripping hand toward me, whispering my name in my mother's voice. And I realized too late that I'd never left the house. Not really, because once you open the hatch, once you see it, part of you stays behind, part of you belongs to it. I don't remember climbing out of the sub-basement or even leaving the house. I only know that one moment I was staring into that faceless burial cloth, and the next I was in my car, engine running, hands shaking so violently I could barely steer. And as I drove, the town seemed quieter than usual, empty even, like it had been hollowed out while I was underground, and every radio station just hissed static, except for one, a low, slow voice reciting names I didn't recognize, until it finally said mine. Twice, once like a sigh, once like a promise, and I turned it off, but the voice didn't stop, just shifted to the vents, then the glove box, then the space behind my eyes, whispering with a weight that made my skull throb. And when I finally reached a different city and checked into another motel, I thought maybe I'd outrun it, left it behind like smoke. But that night, I heard the knock again, 3 slow taps, soft and measured. And this time the door was already unlocked, already easing open, and when I leapt up to slam it shut, there was no one there, just the heavy scent of embalming fluid and old carnations, and scrawled on the mirror in the room's bathroom, not in blood, but in something darker and drier, was the message, "We remember you." And below it, a small, precise drawing of the hatch in the basement, as though it had been watching through my own eyes when I opened it. And after that, every reflection became unreliable. The mirrors, the windows, even puddles after rain would ripple on their own, showing me that tall, shifting shape standing just behind me, always a beat too slow to vanish when I turned. And sometimes, when I passed strangers on the street, they'd flinch, then cross themselves, or mutter, "I'm sorry," under their breath like they could see it too. And worse, sometimes children would cry if I got too close, their eyes wide with the same kind of fear I remembered in my own at 7 years old when I first peeked into the mortuary prep room by accident and saw something I wasn't meant to, something my parents never acknowledged, but that had clearly never left. And now that I've started dreaming again, it's always the same. Me, standing in a dark hallway that stretches too far, with the sound of dragging cloth behind me, getting closer, and every time I wake up, my bed is soaked in that same earthy scent of the basement, the kind that clings to you like sorrow. And I'm starting to suspect that it's not just following me. It's wearing me, bit by bit, memory by memory, hollowing me out the same way it did the house, until one day I won't be the one telling this story anymore. I'll just be another whisper behind someone else's eyes that first. I thought I was losing time, misplacing hours here and there like you forget where you've parked a car, but then it became days, whole stretches vanishing with no memory at all, and every time I tried to piece things together, I'd find things in my pockets that didn't belong to me. A faded photo of a funeral I never attended, a rusted key with teeth worn smooth, a child's bracelet with the name Lori etched into the plastic beads. And worse, messages in my own handwriting I don't remember writing, scribbled in hotel Bibles or inside drawers. Always the same phrase. He only needed a name. And as I stared into the mirror one morning and noticed the faint outlines of something else behind my own eyes, something patiently watching, I remembered the whispered stories the old undertakers used to tell late at night when I was too young to be listening, about a presence that sometimes came back with the bodies, not to haunt, but to inhabit, something ancient and wordless that latched onto sorrow and silence and the names of the forgotten. And I realized with a sick certainty that whatever had been locked in that basement wasn't just a ghost. It was a vacancy, waiting to be filled, and I'd made the mistake of offering it space in me, through my curiosity, through my fear, through the moment I whispered, "Who are you?" in the dark, which was all the invitation it ever needed. And now people don't even look at me the same. Friends flinch when I speak. Clerks avoid my touch. Animals won't come near. And at night, when I press my ear to the pillow, I can hear it whispering to itself, not to me anymore, as if I'm no longer the listener but the echo chamber. And sometimes, when I blink too slowly, the world flickers, not with darkness but with a dull greenish light, like the kind from old embalming rooms. And in those moments I feel buried, not beneath dirt, but beneath something far colder. And I know that eventually, it won't be me dreaming of the hallway. It will be him, moving forward inside this shell, while I watch from further and further away, fading like one of those forgotten names that I tried to run. I switched cities, changed my name. I stopped answering calls from anyone who knew the old me. I even burned the few things that had followed me. Lori's bracelet, the photo, that cursed key. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. The thing wasn't tethered to objects. It was tethered to awareness. And now, I understood the cruel trick. It never needed to haunt the house. It only needed someone to carry it out. I was just the latest. I began recording myself at night, hoping for proof, hoping for something to fight. But every playback was the same. Hours of footage where I'd just sit upright in bed, eyes open, mouth moving silently for minutes at a time, lips forming words I couldn't recognize, until one night, the whisper wasn't silent. "I remember you." That was all it said, in my voice, but spoken like it was trying the shape of human speech for the first time. I haven't slept since. I don't think I even can. My dreams happen while I'm awake now, long, flickering walks down basement hallways that stretch forever, door after door after door, each one opening just a crack as I pass. Sometimes I see faces through them, hollow, weeping, unfamiliar, and other times I swear I see myself, dozens of me, staring back with no eyes at all. That I've accepted it now. I wasn't meant to survive this story. I was meant to spread it. The way a funeral carries a body from silence into ritual, the way a name carves permanence out of death. This thing isn't just feeding on grief. It's preserving it, extending it like embalming fluid through memory, through repetition, through you, even just by listening to SO if you're hearing this. I'm sorry, truly, but now it knows your name too.